Our friend Mr. Al Koken from Monumental Sports Network. How are you,
Smokin
sir?
Al Koken.
What's up, gentlemen? Long time. How have you guys been?
As Doc's son will say, Smokin Al Koken.
That's right. That's right.
What's up, Al? What's been happening, man?
Hey, I wish we were talking after a better performance last night by the Washington Capitals, but that game last night, I know it's probably just one of 82 on the schedule, but considering as JP just mentioned, the trade deadline looming on Friday, that could have major ramifications on what the Capitals do or don't do. I mean, it wasn't a good night on the ice for them, and then they didn't get any help. And right now they're sitting there. They had Columbus pass them in the standings, so you've got Boston with the final wild card spot. They're ahead of the Caps by 4 points, and they've got 3 games in hand. Columbus then jumps over them, and they're up by a point with 3 games in hand. And then if you want to look in the path to even get to the third place in the Metro, both Pittsburgh and the New York Islanders are 6 points ahead, and Pittsburgh's got 3 games in hand, and the Islanders have 2. So the math is not good for the Washington Capitals as they approach this trade deadline on Friday.
Smoke, listen, they come from the Olympic break. They win their first 2 games. They're playing pretty well. Montreal Saturday night, I understand that place is a buzzsaw, super loud, one of the best crowds in hockey. But to come back last night after, you get a couple days rest, I try not to be too hyperbolic that often, but the first period of that game was kind of shocking.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And I think, it was interesting to listen to the players after the game, and particularly Tom Wilson. And there's always that question of there's a disconnect between players and coaches. And, one of the things that I've been so appreciative of coaching staffs over the years, and it's been one of the things I've been proudest to do on my job, and I think the fans appreciate it, is I get to talk to the assistant coaches once each period. And you hear the assistant coaches say things like, we've got to start shipping the puck and getting behind them and putting more pressure. You're hearing what the coaches are telling us. So you are guaranteed they're telling that and more to the players. But when it takes nearly a period and a half for the players to finally pick up exactly what the coaches have been saying, which is start getting the puck in deeper. We're the bigger, more physical team. They're the faster team. They're jumping on us. But the way to turn that around is get them to be playing defense and pound them in their defensive zone. If you get a Clayton Keller and a Logan Cooley and other guys, other good scorers on that team, opportunities, they're going to make you pay, as they did. But once the Capitals finally started to say, you know what, let's play more of the game in their end, what did you see? A complete reversal. They dominated that third period. If Melka doesn't make that unbelievable save, excuse me, on Pierre Dubois late, we're talking about the Caps probably getting at least a point and maybe 2.
How big of a deal is not having John Carlson, Protas? How much is that impacting all of this?
Well, Protas for a game certainly is big, but it's huge not having John Carlson there. You can say all you want about, getting up in years, but John Carlson is still, without question, they're far and away their best two-way defenseman. He's out there on the penalty kill. He's out there in the second unit on the power play. He's still an outstanding defender, and not having him for this stretch has had a real impact. You've had guys sort of, to a certain degree, playing out of position. I thought Rasmus Sandin has been outstanding these last few games, but they're asking a left-handed defenseman to play on the right side, which is not easy, particularly when you're talking about, high pressure that you got from a team like last night. When they're on you and you're on your backhand, it's more difficult to make a play than when you're on your forehand. But, Sandin has been asked to do that. Martin Faravari at times has been asked to do that. So to try and, to lose a guy like John Carlson, a right-hand shooting defenseman, and you'll watch at this trade deadline, watch how much of a commodity any of those right-handed shooting defensemen become, whether they're, top-pairing defensemen or depth defensemen. If you can get one from the right side, that has more value than guys from the left side because they're rare. So to not have John Carlson, not only the player, but the position in your lineup, it's big, JP, no question about it.
Al, as this trade deadline begins to loom, should the Caps be buyers, sellers, what?
Well, and that's the question, BMitch. When I mentioned the math at the start of all this, if you're Chris Patrick, if you're Brian McClellan, if you're the brain trust of the Washington Capitals, where are you realistically? Where is your best chance of getting into the postseason, or where's your best chance to try and maybe do something for the future? I mean, that to me is always the most fascinating part of the job of any general manager. Whether we're talking about Adam Peters, it doesn't really make any difference for so many years. Mike Rizzo with the Nats had to juggle the same thing. Improve the team now, but don't mortgage your future. So how do you do both? And that to me is that delicate balance right now. And that's where last night to me makes this a more difficult decision, because you don't want to abandon the year. There's still games to be played. There's still points to be earned. There's still a possible playoff spot. But if you're realistic and you're looking at what happened last night and you're saying, how do we not get ourselves in this position next year? How do we improve this team moving forward? Is it to give up some of the young assets that you've got to try and get something to help you immediately? Or is it to do what Utah did, which is, unfortunately missed the playoffs for a number of years. And then when you turn around and you see, the Dylan Gunthers and the Logan Cooley's and the Clayton Kellers I just talked about, all high draft choices, all in that range where Ryan Leonard was picked, you say to yourself, well, maybe is it better to say, you know what, this just isn't our year, and it's time now to make sure that we add more of that high-end value talent so that when we do move ahead, when we do have to one day face a team that's not going to have Alex Ovechkin on it. One day, a team that won't have a John Carlson on it. Some of the older guys that won't be there. Are you prepared to be still a relevant team? I don't know what the right answer is, but I'm just telling you that is the dangerous and most difficult question that both, the Capitals Brain Trust have to answer right now. You can see what the loss of a Pierre-Luc Dubois had meant to this team, because the way he's come back, you realize, man, have we missed that for 47 games? So you may have to just say to yourself, you know what, it just wasn't our year. If we had been a healthier team, if we had had some of our key people, for the majority of the season, things may be different. And maybe that's the way to answer it. Or is it to say, you know what, 4 points, 6 points, that's not something that we can overcome. This team has earned the right to make a run. Let's go out and add something to our team. And the other thing, and I'll end it this way. The other thing that was interesting to me is you go back 2 years ago, the Capitals barely squeaked into the playoffs, but they also made a trading away a player in Anthony Mantha that gave them some additional draft choices. So maybe there's the middle ground. Maybe you can make that situation to say, you know what, if the right trade comes along, we'll pick up an asset, but that's not waving the white flag on the season, because we believe if Carlson comes back and now a healthy P.L. Dubois, we've got enough to make a late run, and maybe that's going to be the answer.
It's a really tough year to kind of figure out what the Caps should do. Talking with our friend Al Koken here on the Rude Guest Hotline. Rude makes the most reliable HVAC products in the DMV. Of course, you can watch Al every Caps game. Does a tremendous job working the rink, talking to players, talking to coaches. And going forward here, the gigantic, I don't know that I need to say that when I'm talking about elephants, but the elephant in the room is Ovi. What's going to happen with Alex Ovechkin? I heard Joe B say this, and I don't know if it was in a pregame or a postgame or what, but Joe Beninati said, just because we don't know, they haven't made, there's no public announcement on what Ovi's future is. Just because we don't know doesn't mean Ovi doesn't know, and it doesn't mean the team doesn't know. Do you think the team at least has enough of an idea of Ovechkin's plans going forward to make these decisions, or do they have to make these decisions with uncertainty surrounding Ovechkin?
I think you can have a combination of both, JP, and here's why. I think if Alex decides that he wants to give this one more shot, I don't think that necessarily. I don't think it handicaps the team in terms of making a decision on Friday on something we can add to this squad. I do think it. obviously they're going to have to, they're going to know by the end of the season, at some point in the offseason, put it that way, to understand, do we have his $9 million in cap space and we have to move on now without our captain and a potential, probably this year, 30-goal scorer? Or are we going to get this guy back for one more year? I think there's a way you can kind of juggle if he's back and if he's not back scenario right now. But I do believe they've got to have a little bit, I do believe they have a dual battle plan. In other words, I don't think they'd be caught like, oh my God, we thought you'd be gone, Alex. And now we made all these plans without you. I really do believe there's a combination there, because I think they've felt all along they owe it to Alex to call his shot. Now, maybe Alex has told them already, and obviously it's been a very closely guarded secret if he has. And so, that then takes the second equation out of it, JP. They know already. But without a public statement, we're all kind of speculating the same thing. I feel that Alex, because of what he has done for this franchise, obviously, as we said, deserves the chance to call his own shot. And I know the team is giving him exactly that.
I completely agree with all of that. Ovechkin deserves to call his own shot entirely. However he decides he wants to handle it. And I could see, after the chase last year, Ovi just not really wanting to deal with a big, retirement parade. Because every city he went to, they'd give him a gift and all that. I could see him not wanting to deal with that.
Man, accept that. You were that good. Everybody don't get that.
For sure. But you're obviously not going to trade Ovi. Who do you think are there, if they elected to become sellers, who would make the most sense?
Well, I mean, look at, I think contract situation becomes part of it. Here, I'm just going to throw this out as a scenario as opposed to keep an eye out for this. But what for example, if they decide that, hey, we are pulling the chute on this season and we're going to see what we can get for the highest return we could possibly get. Okay, John Carlson's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. I want John Carlson to end his career the same way it looks like Alex Ovechkin has ended his career, Nick Backstrom getting his career, as a one-time Washington Capital and no other team. But in the past, we've seen with this franchise, including a guy who's got his number hanging up in retirement as number 32, Dale Hunter, we did see the Capitals approach Dale Hunter and say to him, we're not going to make the playoffs. Would you like one more chance to go for a Stanley Cup? And they traded him to the Colorado Avalanche. So if you went to John Carlson and said the same thing, John Carlson would give you big return.
Yeah.
You could also then not rule out the return and the offseason of John Carlson to finish out his career as a Washington Capital. I mean, both can be true, but I'm just throwing that out and saying, to answer your question, I don't think the Capitals are actively shopping John Carlson, but if it does become a time to make a decision and they approach John Carlson and he says, yeah, I'd be open to seeing, what I could do with a contending team, I could see that as being the avenue to get them the most in return. But at the same time, I do firmly believe the Capitals, like they did with Nick Backstrom, like they were going to do with Alex Ovechkin, see John Carlson as a lifetime Capital and want him to end his career here.
So that's really interesting and makes a ton of sense. And I just think in my lifetime, I know that Art Monk left. I know that Brian Mitchell left. I remember Gary Clark playing in.
I was kicked out. Jay.
Sure, but I remember Gary Clark playing in a Cardinals uniform. But when those guys come back, it doesn't change at all. If Carly was to get moved, it doesn't change at all what I think of him as a Cap and as an American, really.
I'm with you. And again, I'm truly throwing that out to answer your question in terms of.
I gotcha.
If you want to get something, you're going to have to give up something, right? And it's a unique situation with John Carlson being an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. Now, maybe they've got something worked out between them, already. And maybe the ramifications of an extension are there, just, tweak it on the margins here or there. Like, Ethan Frank just got signed to a contract extension. I didn't hear any buzz about, hey, we're eminent on Ethan Frank, but John Carlson is in a completely different category. He's a Capitals icon, and it would take a lot to even consider moving him. But if it did come down to where both player and team said this could be beneficial to both, then I could see that scenario. Other than that, you're just talking about, you're going to have to answer the phone and with another general manager saying, what would you like for so-and-so and so-and-so? So there's value on this team, but the other thing is, if you move away from some of the guys on this team, where does that leave you moving ahead? You're losing assets that could maybe help you next year, or is the plan to say, you know what, we'll worry about next year. Let's get what we can this year if we've decided to become sellers. I mean, that's why Friday is going to be so fascinating, guys, because I just don't know where they really believe they are. Do you owe it to this team that really, kind of hung in there during the injury to P.L. Dubois and stayed relevant and stayed in the mix? Do you owe it to them to add something to try and put them over the top? Or do you just kind of say, you know what, it's just not our year. Let's try and reload this thing to make us bigger and better and more of a competitive team. These speed teams are giving this Capital team nightmares. Let's be honest. They're not the fastest team. One of the reasons why you re-sign an Ethan Frank is because he's one of the speed guys on this team. They need to add more speed to this team. And I don't know if there's anything out there in this approaching free agency period, because that's the other consideration. This potential summer free agency looks to be a disaster because all the good free agents, for the most part, have been re-signed by their teams, taken off the market. So if you're sitting there saying, you know what, if Alex retires and goes back to Russia, we're going to have his $9 million to spend on a free agent. Well, there's maybe not the free agents out there to spend it on. So maybe it is going to be better to either keep somebody or make a trade for somebody that's got some term, or maybe make a trade like you did with P.L. Dubois, where you're taking on a guy that's got a contract that another team wants to move, but at least he's signed for 3, 4, 5 more years. That may be a way to go as well at the trade deadline, to say, you know what, let's get something that maybe could help us this year, but we're going to think about this in the future because we're going to have some cap space to spend and we can absorb this contract. So there's, all kinds of ramifications that are available to them on Friday.
What's crazy is if they won last night, do you think we'd be having a different conversation? Like, did this hinge on one game?
Well, I can't imagine it hinges on one game, but that game last night and what happened elsewhere in the league, JP, really, to me, makes a big difference because of the math that I just mentioned. Yeah. And part of the problem is it's one thing to say, hey, we can go on a winning streak. If we put a 5-6 game win streak together, we're going to pick up 10, 12 points. But what happens to the teams in front of you that loses a game in overtime and picks up a point? You're instead of picking up 12 points, you may be just picking up 6 points because the other teams are getting a point in a loss. So it's difficult to move when you're this quote unquote far behind. It doesn't seem like you're that far behind, but when teams are playing each other like that, and the other night it was the Columbus and the Islanders, goes to overtime. So two teams you want a definitive loss by one of the teams. Right. Instead, one team loses but picks up a point and moves ahead of you by one more point. So this is what makes it so difficult this time of year to gain ground, even though, hey, 3 points, 4 points, that doesn't sound like much. Yeah, but with these extra loser points, it is.
Yeah. Right. Smoke, thank you for the time, man. Appreciate you, dude.
Always a pleasure, guys. Good talking with you.
All right, brother.
So, friend Al Koken, make sure you watch him. Watch the Caps on Monumental Sports Network. Some major questions coming for the Washington Capitals. When we return, some major questions coming for the Washington Commanders, including